Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair and councillors, first, just by way of introduction, I want to say we do genuinely wish you all the best in what we see as a very difficult task. We think you've inherited a planning framework that essentially has prioritised economic growth at the expense of ecological wisdom, and that we continue to reap the outcomes of that in Canterbury. And we sincerely hope, therefore, that you'll lead the development and implementation of a long-term plan that signals transformational changes in the way we relate to land and water in Canterbury, that also results in better environmental outcomes and also doesn't accentuate but helps to heal the divisions in our community. So dealing with our first submission, our first slide, looking at level of service 1 in the draft, AWA would like to see Council allocate sufficient funding to overhaul the planning documents. I know we've just had a submission from Federated Farmers, which basically indicates their support for a continuation of the existing planning approaches, particularly around nitrate loss, I assume. We would say that the existing documents are insufficient to use as a guide or template to what needs to happen in Canterbury. The government's freshwater strategy has brought about a new paradigm, and particularly an order of priorities that requires that we put the health of the water first, including our aquifers. We put the health needs of people second, including the right to clean and uncontaminated drinking water, and that economic considerations are now in a third order of priority. I'm talking about Te Mana Wai here, specifically the order of priority in that document, and that economic considerations are not prioritised ahead of social or cultural considerations. So what we're dealing with is a new paradigm, and we don't believe that the existing planning documents represent central government's approach to the management of water anymore. The Canterbury Water Management Strategy now has no statutory authority since the repeal of the legislation, which was introduced at the time that Canterbury lost its democratic rights. The contents, AWA would say, are inconsistent with the government's freshwater strategy and community expectations. And again, the Canterbury Water Management Strategy shouldn't be treated as any sort of basis for a rewrite of the planning documents and the rules. We believe a bold approach is needed, and that approach must also ensure greater community input into decision-making on applications, particularly applications that affect or may affect people's health and well-being. So I'll go on to slide 2. So this is around monitoring particularly. We would say that there's been a over-reliance on modelling and an under-reliance on monitoring to date, and we would like to see Council fund and prioritise monitoring ahead of modelling. We want to see Council invest in far more frequent and transparent monitoring, particularly bore monitoring, and more regular analysis and public dissemination of the results. We believe independent involvement is required, and also significant stakeholder involvement at every step, including selection of sites, the actual monitoring and the analysis, in order to overcome what we see as a significant trust deficit in the assessment of the effects of the way in which we're managing our land and water. So we would like to see modelling de-emphasised as a useful tool for setting and measuring environmental targets and effects. AWA and many other groups have no particular faith in Overseer as a modelling tool. We're aware of its flaws, we're aware of the conflicts involved in Overseer. There is a widespread lack of community trust, and we believe there's a capacity for results to be gained, and I imagine there's people in this room who are aware of the way in which Overseer has been gamed to produce certain results in the past. We believe that if modelling is to continue to be used as a tool, then council should itself invest in or participate in the development of truly independent and credible modelling tools. So the next slide deals with the freshwater regulatory framework. I want to speak in particular to paragraph 2, subparagraph 3 of that slide at the moment. Local Government New Zealand recently adopted a resolution calling for a moratorium on the grant of further water bottling consents until a proper regulatory framework could be established. Now that's far from being established. So ECan is part of a group that has called for that moratorium, and we would like to see ECan give effect to that, to give practical effect to it in the way that it writes its rules in the new plan. We remind councillors that, I'll point out that export water bottling offends the first and second priorities of Te Mana o Te Wai, and particularly the second, in that it potentially puts at risk the public right to drinking water security for generations to come. It also offends the first of the 6 principles of Te Mana o Te Wai, that of mana whakahaere, or the power or authority and obligation of tangata whenua to make decisions that maintain, sustain and protect the health and well-being of and their relationship with fresh water. And if you want to know specifically how export water bottling offends these principles, I'll simply refer you to the affidavit of Dr. Ricky Tau, which was filed in support of Ngāi Ahuriri's involvement in AWA's challenge to the Belfast water bottling consents. And that affidavit sets out in some detail the way in which export water bottling offends that right, or the right of mana whenua, in relation to water management and the authority over water. I'd like to remind councillors that there are many industrial water bottling consents in Christchurch in particular that could be very readily turned into water bottling consents. These are industrial consents that are by and large not used, or they're only very partially used. They could be turned into water bottling consents, and they could be used 24/7, and maximum take could in practice be taken. The conditions could be changed to allow water to be taken under those consents from our deepest drinking water aquifers without public notification, as happened at Belfast. And so we need to write rules, council needs to write rules to ensure that this doesn't happen and that we meet community expectations in this regard. AWA believes that council should set aside funding specifically to address this issue, including obtaining appropriate legal advice on how this can be done. And it needs to involve stakeholders such as AWA and Ngāi Ahuriri. So looking at the next slide, level of service 9, good management practices. We would urge council to adopt, if it's going to adopt management practices at all, to adopt best management practices, particularly for dairy farming, because the challenges associated with changing the climate, with climate change and the changes in central government policy require that we do adopt better practices than we have to date. And because central government has now recognised and is starting to push the need for regenerative farming, and we believe there is also a need to investigate alternative land uses. Unlike federated farmers, AWA does not have a great deal of confidence that the measures in the current plan, particularly around nitrate loss, are or are going to result in significant improvements in environmental outcomes or indeed health outcomes. We believe the only viable approach which will result in certainty of outcome is reduction in cow numbers on the Canterbury Plains. And that will require either, but most likely both, a move to regenerative or transformative farming and alternative land uses. We would like to see ECan become a driver of that. We as a group, AWA, have entered into discussions with irrigation companies directly. We don't believe that this needs to result in farmers going broke. We would like to see that that's not the case. We want to support people's right to an economic livelihood on the plains, but we believe it can't be business as usual. Things need to change. And we believe that regenerative farming and alternative land uses are probably the most viable options for that. We'd like to see ECan drive for that. Final point in the slide, the Danish report. We'd like Council to allocate further funds to investigate what was written up in that report. And that report has come in for some criticism. AWA has engaged directly with Dr. Jürg Schulliner, who is one of the lead authors of that report. He said that those criticisms are probably a result of misunderstanding of that report, that there's nothing in that report that he would resile from, and that he would presumably back that up. So given the critical conclusions in that report, we'd say Council needs to address it.
Thank you, Peter, for your submission on behalf of AWA. Do we have any quick questions of clarification? Councillor Marshall.
Sure, thank you very much for your submission. Just a question regarding your written submission, page 5. You proposed amendments to one of the performance measures to read collect, analyse and publish data instead of just collecting and publishing data. What sort of analysis were you looking for? Do you have any examples? And if just press your button to get the mic back, please.
Primarily independent analysis, and there's various organisations and academics that could provide that independent analysis. So effectively, that would be analysis on where the trends are heading, what we're actually seeing on the ground. Are we seeing improvement? Are we likely to see improvement? I'm talking about bore monitoring in particular. What can we expect as a result of the present situation in terms of historical nutrient losses to soils and to aquifers? And are we actually seeing improvement, or are we seeing a worsening, or are we seeing a maintenance of the status quo? Not talking just about aquifers, I'm also talking about stream ecology and the like as well. Yeah.
One further question.
Thank you. In your submission, you talk about the order of the RPS and the Land and Water Regional Plan and the notification of those coming together in 2024, but you talk about that not necessarily being possible or the right way of doing things. Would you care to explain a bit more?
Yeah, happy to do that. And I didn't, just through time constraints, I didn't really have a chance to address that in the written submission, but the way we read the proposals at the moment is that perhaps the regional policy statement, but in any event, the policy framework that's going to underline the plans is to be undertaken at the same time as the actual LWRP and the rules. We would like to see the policy framework established very clearly in advance, because it's not much point writing a plan if you don't know where you're coming from in terms of your policy framework. So we see that as the priority. We'd like to see that policy framework in place by at least 2023, so that we can launch into the writing of the plan and the rules by 2024 in accordance with the freshwater management strategy and the requirements.
Thank you, Peter, for a strong and submission, well thought out, which everyone has the ability to further read and contemplate. Thank you.